Network. I am one of your co-hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined by my co-host Scott Karasik. And today we are joined by none other than former Washington Redskin and Minnesota Vikings cornerback Fred Smoot. Fred's going to be here talking with us about the Falcons, the Vikings, the NFL in general. Fred is a multifaceted, versatile person, so he can roll with the punches on any sort of football-related topics. So welcome to the show, Fred.
Hey, thanks, fella. Thanks for having me, man. And great intro, man. You hit everything spot on.
All right, Fred. Let's jump into it. You play for the Vikings. They're facing the Falcons this upcoming week. What do you see in this upcoming matchup between the Falcons and Vikings, particularly maybe given how these teams are playing right now? This may be a preview of a future playoff matchup between these two teams.
But hey, the way these two teams are playing right now, let's be honest about the Minnesota Vikings. And I tell people this all the time. Offense sell tickets and defense win championships. Right now, they're playing with a quarterback by the name of Case Keenum. A lot of people might not know him. But at the end of the day, they're running the ball and they're playing great defense. Xavier Rhodes could be, if not, one of the top three corners in the league. And Daho and the rest of that defensive backfield is nasty. Anthony Barr and in the front with Emerson Griffin. When you play the Minnesota Vikings, it's going to be a slow, sluggish, snot bubble type game. They can run the ball and they can play defense. Now, let's flip it over to the Falcons. They're getting back to that recipe that started them to winning last year. They're back to that team. They shook out the Super Bowl hangover. They're getting these backs back involved in the game. And Sark is, people had to give Sark a little chance to really get used to this offense and to this team. And he's figured out something that it don't even take a rocket scientist to hard to figure out. Get the ball to Julio Jones. At the end of the day, one of the most dominant wide receivers I've ever seen. And long as Matt Ryan is getting the ball in his hands, I think it's going to be a battle back and forth. And like you said, it could be a preview for a playoff game coming in the future.
I have to agree that it's probably going to be a playoff game coming in the future. But speaking of the monster known as Julio Jones, he had an insane game against the Bucs. What was it? 12 catches, 253
230,
yards.
253, crazy.
I mean, if you were still playing, Fred, do you think you could check him? Because I only think there's like three corners in history that probably could. And
when you say check him, when you say check him, what you mean? Do I have to check him man-to-man all day by myself for one-on-one battle with Julio Jones? I've checked the T.O.s of the world. I had to check the Randy Mosses of the world. And if you ask me, he's a great combination of them both. He's big and strong like T.O. He's fast down the field like Randy Moss. If any defensive coordinator in their right mind puts anybody out there for 4 quarters along with that guy, you're a fool. At the end of the day, if you want to beat the Atlanta Falcons, you shut Julio Jones down. If you know anything as a coordinator, you put one corner on him and you put a safety over top and you tell your other corner he's going to go man-to-man on Sanu and he's going to have to win that battle because you don't put one guy on him. Now, who I like to see play him all the time because he matches him in size, and that's Richard Sherman. Not only in size, but Richard Sherman loves to compete. I think that's a great, great matchup when you want to put a guy on him. I love Marcus Peters, but sometimes Marcus can get lost with his eyes. I love Pat Peterson with him, but Julio has won most of those matchups. So if I had to pick a guy, I'd pick Richard Sherman, who I feel is a younger version of me. So, yes, I think I would have had a chance. So you say I got a chance.
So, the two of the three guys I'm going to say you played next to, Champ Bailey and Deion Sanders, are two of the guys that I think would actually be able to handle him.
I don't know. I know Deion would have been able to. Now, when I played with Champ, the one thing they did when we played the taller receivers, that was kind of my forte. I love to play tall receivers. I love to jump ball. I have very long arms. So in that tail, we would match me up with the taller guys and Champ up with the faster guys that would his height are smaller. So, like I said, if I had to pick a guy to truly go one-on-one with him, somebody that I know who's going to make the deep ball be a hard throw because of his length, a guy that's going to be able to jam Julio at the line, a guy that's going to be able to come out the cuts with Julio, and a guy that's going to have to make Matt Ryan throw some spot-on passes. Like I said before, I think it's Richard Sherman. Hello?
Aaron, we're not able to hear you right now. You okay?
Yeah. Can y'all hear me?
That's my fault.
No, I got.
I had my. That was my bad. Fred, one of our listeners asked a question about who was the best receiver that you ever covered during your career.
The best receiver, and I always tell people this, it's not about the receiver. It's the quarterback. The quarterback makes the receiver. I could go out there and check Jerry Rice for 4 quarters if he got Sam Bradford throwing to him. At the end of the day, it's the quarterback that determines how good the wide receiver is. So if I'm checking somebody like Marvin Harrison, he's going to be hard for me to check because I know Peyton Manning is going to give him 15 chances to burn me. So it's all about the quarterback. Aaron Rodgers goes out there with receivers we don't even know their name, and he burns defensive backs because he throws the ball where we cannot get it, and the wide receivers are the only ones. So tell that fan the hardest receiver to cover is any Hall of Fame or great quarterback, period. It's never the receiver, it's the quarterback.
Okay. Fred, you played with a lot of great cornerbacks during your career. Champ Bailey. Um, if you were picking a Mount Rushmore of the all-time great cornerbacks, whether you played with them or you admired them from afar, who would be your 4 guys?
Oh, my 4 guys. I did this on CBS not too long ago. Well, of course, number 1 is the king of the cornerback position, the guy that revolutionized the position of cornerback. The reason we make all this money, the reason we have this flamboyant personalities is Mr. Deion Sanders. He's the GOAT. He's the one that starts it off. And coming in at number 2 is Rod Woodson. I think Rod Woodson, because he wasn't the trash talker or the one that really got out there and did, I thought Rod Woodson was the perfect corner. Better yet, he's the perfect DB. He made the first perfect transition to free safety. Unbelievable guy. The Rod Woodson at 2. And at number 3, now I played with Dale Green. And I think Dale Green is a wonder when it comes to playing the cornerback position and longevity. But I would have to go with Champ Bailey at number 3 as a guy that can do literally everything. And then when you sometimes talk about Dale and you look at the numbers of years he played, it doesn't really match up to the interceptions he had. So I'm going to put Champ Bailey at 3. And at number 4, and it's always a struggle because I can literally put 6 guys at number 4 from the Eric Adams of the world, the Cornelius Williams of the world. Man, I could go on and on. But if I had to pick a 4th cornerback, Darrelle Revis had an unbelievable career. And I think people start to forget about him because his career ended kind of abruptly. He kind of like just fell off a hill. But I thought he was one of the top end guys that I played with. So now I would updo it and say Darrelle Revis would be probably number 4.
And Darrelle Revis is probably the 3rd guy who I would say that could man up with Julio Jones outside of Champ Bailey and Deion Sanders.
Well, he better be in his prime. Because one thing Darrelle did.
I'm talking these guys in their primes.
Darrelle did.
In their career.
Yeah, I totally understand because Darrelle did a good job of never being in bad positions. He always stayed on top of his receiver, no matter if it was a go route or a comeback or a dig route. He could really figure out what route you was going to run. True student of the game.
Now, 2 guys who've been really impressive to me since they came in the league in 2013 are Desmond Trufant and Xavier Rhodes. They're both top end corners, but both have different kind of skill sets. I would say Trufant's more of that all around corner, the way that Champ Bailey was, the way that Darrelle Revis was, and I'd say a guy like Rhodes is more similar to the new age corner like Sherman, but maybe a little more speed than even Sherman has. Which guy do you which do you value more?
I've watched both of these guys. I watch, Trufant, very slippery, quick in and out of his cuts, can make the play on the ball. But when I want to talk about a guy that could take away a side of a field, a guy that's a specimen when you literally see how big and strong and fast he is, he reminds me of a younger Sean Springs. I'm talking about a guy that also is a bookworm, a guy that when you play cover two, he's forced to tackle. He's a vicious tackler. I'm going with Xavier Rhodes. I'm sorry, pound for pound. He's one of the best in the league right now. And if you want to talk about a cornerback that you can design a defense around and a cornerback that's going to literally take half of the field away, Xavier Rhodes is that guy out there. I think it's hands down.
Fred, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on sort of the topic du jour right now is the rivalry between Aqib Talib and Michael Crabtree. Was there a wide receiver?
I love it.
Was there a wide receiver during your playing days that you had that level of beef with, where you would have tried to snatch his chain twice?
Yes, I love it, and I love when I watch it on TV. And they put up Talib stacks against Michael Crabtree, and they put like 7 interceptions and how many yards, and they put like 2 chain snatches. I thought it was the funniest thing I had heard in a while. At the end of the day, I love it, man, because it adds to the drama and the storytelling of football. It's just not about athletes, this team versus that team. It's some guys with some bitter rivalries out there that really hate each other gut. It's like me and Steve Smith. I hate Steve Smith. I respect Steve Smith. He respects me, but we don't get along. If we seen each other in the grocery store, walking past each other, we would probably go at it in the grocery store. So at the end of the day, some of these rivalries are not for show. These rivalries are serious. And Talib is one of those guys. Y'all got to understand, he ain't got it all. He ain't real tight. And he's a guy that's not afraid to step up and step out and do anything. But like I said before, I enjoyed it. I loved it. It was great theater. I didn't think they deserved 2-game suspension because I just watched Jalen Ramsey and A.J. Green do the same thing and nobody got suspended.
I mean, just because they were, to me, because they fought, they brought others into it, and it wound up being more of a brawl between 2 teams, and you're suspending the 2 ringleaders, I'm okay with that, with the suspension, but I'm with you that, like, it shouldn't be 2 games. Like, maybe half of a game.
Well, come on. They already got suspended at what? The 3rd minute of the game? They already been suspended for a full game. This is actually going to be 3 full games that these teams have to do without these players. And we're talking about a fight. Come on, this is a gladiator sport. We fight in practice. We fight all the time. At the end of the day, I think the NFL is just trying to make up for some of these other visual mess-ups they've did over the years and reason why they think the ratings are getting low and stuff. They're just trying to make up with that about suspending these 2 guys because they fought on camera. Come on, man.
And that's fair. And that I didn't remember that it was in the 3rd minute of the game because I was sitting there writing an article about the Falcons beating the Buccaneers. So, a brawl is probably not the best thing. Now, on to a different topic. You were talking about on the radio about Sean Taylor, who passed away 10 years ago, almost to the day. And you mentioned playing alongside him, that you'd be aware of friendly fire just because of how he played. Atlanta had their own kind of incident this week with Keanu Neal flying around, and Trufant got concussed during the second half of the game. What was it like to play with a hard-hitting safety like that, and what's one of your favorite memories of Sean?
Well, it's funny you asked that question, man. We had this rule as the cornerbacks. Make the tackle and get down as quick as possible. You know, it's already hard to make a tackle in the league, but not when you already got it in the back of your head. Not only do I need to get this tackle, I need to get this guy down probably like in 1.3 seconds, because if I don't, somebody by the name of Cheryl Taylor is going to run to this pile, and he's going to hurt everybody in this pile. He's truly aiming for the other person, but he left me in Dallas with a lacerated kidney. He's bruised my ribs. He separated a shoulder. That's the impact of 6'3.5", 250 pounds, running a 4.40, coming down here with bad intentions. So at the end of the day, we know this. You either early to the party or you late to the party, but regardless, you got to pay to get in. These players, and you know, it's one of those guys. He loves contact. And when you play with a safety like that, it benefits you in the pass game because now I don't have to check I don't have to really play post route type. I don't have to play big route type. Anything to the inside, the receivers are going to be looking for their safety. Makes my job easy. I can play outside heavy. I can squat on some things. Playing with these players is a blessing and a curse at the same time, because when you have to show up in the run game, you know who else is going to have to show up, and you're going to have to get down quick. But I can remember at practice sometimes we would do walkthroughs. And most people in the league know that walkthroughs are truly walkthroughs. They're nothing else. But Coach Gibbs always had to remind Sean before the walkthrough, it's a walkthrough, Sean. So we're gonna walk it through now. We're going to walk through. We ain't going to do nothing else. They would literally hike the ball the first time, and Sean would run downhill and literally smash Clint Portis like we're fully equipped. Like he had only one speed. It don't matter if we was walking through. It don't matter if we was practicing. It don't matter if it was a game. He only knew how to play one way, and that was physical. So sometimes I wonder how much would his game even translated to the game today. Would he been buying most of his money? Because I don't see him changing the way he plays.
Now, in your last couple of years in Washington, you also got to play alongside a former Falcon in D'Angelo Hall. Between the two of you, who talked more trash?
I'm more of a talker than D Hall. D Hall, when D Hall really gets to woofing at you, he really doesn't like you. Like D Hall is, both of us are very passionate, but I'm just a smack talker from the time we come in, time we go out. D'Angelo is deliberately going to get at whoever he wants to get at. He's ultra competitive. And the one thing I can say about D'Angelo, I played with a lot of great corners, and all of them been different. Never saw a pair of hands on a cornerback as good as the pair of hands that D'Angelo has. D'Angelo has true wide receiver hands, and I've had me and my boy Corey Chapin had many crazy debates of would he been a better wide receiver than a cornerback. But I think he's had, to me, a Hall of Fame career if you look at his numbers. D Hall, especially when it comes to interception return for touchdowns, I think he should be right at 40 plus, almost 50 interceptions. I don't know. It speaks for itself. You know, he's one of those guys. The ball finds him. He's like one day Barber in that way. Like the ball just falls right in front of D Hall at all times.
I think that's fair. I mean, I wish that Trufant had Hall's hands, because he'd be a 8-9 interception a year kind of guy as opposed to a 2 interception a year kind of guy.
Well, that goes to finishing plays. That goes to finishing plays, and that's something that Trufant would get as he ages. But right now, I think Trufant is one of the top cornerbacks, especially in the NFC, period. I think he's proved he can play playoff ball. He can play championship ball. I think he's a cornerback that you can build a defense around, and I see them building that defense in Atlanta. A lot of young guys, a lot of speed on that defense, a lot of depth, especially when everybody's healed up and everybody's well. So I think the future is bright in Atlanta. I think the franchise quarterback, franchise wide receivers, 2 running backs. You know, at the end of the day, the only thing they need to replenish is make sure they replenish the trenches, the offensive line and the D-line. But I think they're on the right path, and I think they are a team hungry enough to get back to the Super Bowl this year.
Fred, I'm curious.
Oh, go ahead.
Fred, I'm curious. Concussions are a big topic in today's NFL, and as a player that experienced your own fair share of concussions during your playing days, what do you feel like the league has done, and do you feel like they've done enough to address some of the player safety concerns?
Oh, most definitely. They've went out their way to try to address these things by almost changing the game and almost turning the game into a glorified pillow fight. Let's be honest, at the end of the day, they've taken all the physicality and all the blind shots and all the other things out of it. It's only so much you can take out of it and keep it football. It's a collision sport. It's a gladiator sport. It's a contact sport. It's always going to be broke hands, broke shoulders. It's going to be concussions. It's just going to be part of the game. But where they really stepped up with was the awareness. The only reason it's a lawsuit is because they did not make the players aware of what could happen from these concussions. So awareness is where everything started, and I think they've done a great job of making everybody aware, from the little league to collegiate football, about head injuries, about concussions. Is it 100%? No. Is it going to get better? Yes. As technology gets better, as the helmets get better, as they monitor the guys better. But I just got to be honest with you. Most of these guys are still playing with concussions because they still got children to feed at home. They still got money to make. They still know that if they take their play off, somebody else can go in and become a star. So most of the time, it's just a train of thought of an athlete is, I'm not going to miss a play no matter what. I'm not coming out this game. I'm not losing my job. I'm going to keep grinding. So as long as the athlete's mentality is that, they're always going to be hitting concussion, and there's always going to be hitting things away from the public and away from people that they'll never know about.
So now, on a different note, one issue that I've been seeing with the NFL today is they need a minor league development type system.
Perfect conversation.
I know you've been working with minor league football, so what are your thoughts on how that developmental league needs to work?
We are working right now. We're going back and forth with the NFL. We've had meetings with them. We're talking to them right now. At the end of the day, with the last bargaining agreement, they decided to practice less, and right now the game is taking a hit from it. Offensive line players at an all-time low because the offensive line out of everybody needs to rep. The quarterback position, depth-wise, is at an all-time low because the second-string quarterback never gets any reps. So at the end of the day, come week 10, come week 7, everybody's calling people off the street to join their team. Why do that when you can have 50 extra guys already in your farm system, already knowing your playbook, already a part of your team? And it not only builds the roster, it also gives the owners a chance to say, if they ever wanted to up the season to 18 games, 19 games, that's the way you do it, by having 40, 50 extra bodies. And at the end of the day, it's going to be 5,000 kids come out every year trying to hunt the same jobs. There's just not enough jobs. If we were developing these players and giving these extra jobs, and not just to players, to coaches, to guys that want to be trainers, to everybody. It's the second level of everybody. To guys that aspire to be NFL GMs, that will become GM in the minor league system first. I think it hits on everything that the NFL is missing. And right now, we're looking for the game to start airing right after the NBA championship, that little dead period where there's no sports, so it almost be spring football. Give these guys a couple weeks before training camp to heal for the ones that's going to get caught in the training camp. So we're working hard on it, and we're talking to players from each city that play for former teams and stuff like that. A lot of players are going to take on ownership. So we're in the process of making things happen now. I don't want to make any promises, but it's looking good.
It's great to hear, Fred, because
awesome.
I've been a big advocate of the league needs a developmental league, because everything you said, it's basically they're losing money by not developing players. Everybody talks about the officiating being bad. You can develop officials at a lower level, as well as the coaching, as you mentioned. So I think if you guys can get things going as far as that goes, I think it would be a huge, huge development for the future of the NFL.
Yeah, just watch out. You'll start to hear a lot of momentum about the MFL. I already got the naming rights. We're starting to meet with a pair of companies. We're meeting with the cities that we're talking about putting the teams in, 32 teams to match the 32 teams to match the NFL. So everything is kind of, like I said, everything is kind of coming right now. So the MFL I think it's going to be a big thing. It's the last frontier part is ownership for sporting groups. I think, at the end of the day, like you said, the NFL is the only big nationalist sport that doesn't have a minor league system, period. It makes no sense. Guys like Johnny Manziel or Tim Tebow could be getting better, in this minor league.
So I had an article back in 2012 that kind of detailed the minor league where it was 16 teams, and there would be 2 teams that would kind of join together and set up for that minor league, and each team would contribute like 25 or so players, and they would run the same. It'd be teams that ran the same kind of system. So like Atlanta and Seattle could be a team together, at least for defense, and they do run a lot of similar things on offense. Would that be something you could see could work?
No. It's like being married. Your wife don't want to share you with anybody. At the end of the day, these teams don't like to share anything. They want their own property. They want their own entity, and that's what we're trying to get to them. We're looking hard at the minor baseball league system, how it's ran, the things it's done. The only thing about football, the numbers are doubled. You know, it's a lot more football players. And once you take because the owners still have a taste in their mouth about losing money with NFL Europe. But it was their fault because they tried to take something overseas and sell it to something that people don't even like. All right, at the end of the day, football is American sport. You know, you need to keep it at home, keep these guys at home. They can save their money. Their money won't get taxed as much. You know, stuff like that. There's been a lot of the pitfalls that stopped a minor league system from being developed and being done. It's just they went about the wrong way of doing it. And now that we can take a lot of the risk away from them, they're more willing and inclined to deal with it and make it come true.
Well, Fred, I wish you the best in that regard and in any other future endeavors you have. Is there anything else you want to plug before we let you go?
Oh, man. Hey, you know me, man. Fellas, thank y'all for having me, man. I never met a mic I ain't like. I enjoy talking trash. Thank y'all for calling me up anytime, man. Don't take so long next time.
All right. Well, Fred, we hope to get you back on a later date, maybe when the Falcons are in the playoffs.
All right. Let me know, brother.
All right, man.
All right. Thanks, man. All right, thanks, brother.
Okay, guys, that was Fred Smoot, former Vikings, former Redskins corner. I remember when Fred came out many, many years ago. I was wanting the Falcons to draft him because I was a big fan of his at Mississippi State. Go check out Fred. He was an entertainer and an icon during his playing days. So let's get back to the regular show, as we often do on the show. We're going to talk about this past win against the Bucks. We're talking about next week's upcoming matchup against the Vikings, and we'll answer you guys' mailbag questions. We usually start this thing off talking roster moves, but for the first time in forever, the Falcons haven't made a roster move this week. And maybe they'll make one in later this week. We'll see. We have a mailbag questions later on in the show that might address that a little bit later. But let's jump into this Bucks game. Falcons won 34-20. Big offensive performance. Big offensive output for the Falcons. 516 total yards. 10 20-plus yard plays. They converted 11 of 14 third downs. Outside that quarter and a half in the second half during the fourth quarter where the defense led up a little bit with two Bucks scoring drives. The defense played particularly well. Didn't get a ton of sacks, but were able to generate pressure, stop the run, and for the most part, keep those very good Bucks wide receivers in check, even given some of their injuries in the secondary. Some players I thought stood out. I thought this was Jake Matthews' probably his best game in quite some time. I think it helped that Robert Ayers didn't play. I think he probably would have had a little bit more trouble, but you know, what do we say when it's a good defensive player against a bad offensive player? You know, when Vic Beasley's whooping Rab Havenstein for 3.5 sacks, you know, we don't sit there and make excuses. It's like when you're going up against backup defensive ends, and given the Bucs struggles at the defensive end position this year, it makes total sense that Jake Matthews would mostly dominate in this game and really be an impact player both in pass protection and in the run game. Obviously, Julio Jones had the monster performance as well. Scott, were there any other players that stood out to you this past Sunday?
Matt Ryan obviously had a great performance. The passes that he missed were all, I mean, he had, I want to say 2 throwaways, and then he missed like 6 other passes, but they weren't like big misses. They were, Julio, sorry, my dog who's named Julio is just getting under my feet all the time right now. His misses weren't big, and it was just the kind of game that Ryan needed to have to continue back on this track that he's been on. And then Tevin Coleman had a great game. It wasn't just that he had 97 yards on 19 carries or the 2 touchdowns. He was just getting after it all day. He was running hard. I don't think I've ever seen him run as angry as he's run. And I think he had maybe 2 negative runs all day, and they were on those toss-crack sweeps that are, you know, very boom or bust. And even on one of those, it was like a -1 when he was stopped at the 5, like stopped 5 yards back. So I'm a huge fan of what Tevin Coleman did, and I would love to see him do it again. And then you can't just not mention Mohamed Sanu, Aaron. You're always trying to leave my dude out, but, like, Sanu killed it. So he had 8 catches for 64 yards, which doesn't look great on the surface, but he had 3 catches on third down that were just 2 or 3 yards past the line, which those aren't the kind of catches. Yeah, it's a 6-yard catch. Yeah, it's a 5-yard catch. Yeah, it's an 8-yard catch. But those are the kind of catches that are, like, those are what makes the game – those are what makes a receiver useful in the game. And all those clutch third downs are needed, especially as they move forward and they go, oh, hey, we've got to play the Vikings. That clutch third down against the Vikings is going to be a lot more magnified. So Sanu was killing it there, and then the 51-yard touchdown pass.
Yeah, look, he played well. I think there's a quarterback controversy in Atlanta because, I know of one quarterback on the Falcons roster that has a perfect quarterback ranking throughout his career, and his name is not Matt Ryan. So we'll see how that situation plays out. I think Matt Schaub has to be looking over his shoulder, and if Matt Ryan didn't win the MVP last year, I think he might have to be looking over his shoulder too, because Sanu might be coming for his job. Let's get into some of these questions. We always get the question from Evan Birchfield, who's the brother of the week. I basically gave my guy already with Jake Matthews. That brother of the week is something that Evan came up with several weeks ago and asks every week. It's basically the player who had the best game but doesn't get sort of the public recognition. Scott, who is your brother of the week?
Takk McKinley. He was setting the edge. He got a sack. He made a couple plays behind the line. He was just eating up Dotson all game. And then he flipped over to the right side for a play. They ran right at him, and he shed off Donovan Smith for a play. Takk McKinley was killing it this past week. I'd have to give it to him.
Okay. All right, our first mailbag question comes from ATL Sports 404. What were your thoughts on the Falcons' pass rush versus Tampa Bay? I felt like we were getting pressures and hurries, but not sacks.
When I went back and watched it, it looked like Tampa's whole passing situation with Ryan Fitzpatrick was 3 steps, get the ball out. Couple steps, get the ball out. Don't let the pass rush get there. So outside of maybe 1 or 2 plays where Fitzpatrick was out there just running around in the back and magically having forever to throw, Atlanta was getting there. He was just timing it to get out of his hand right before he got smacked. I counted 10 hits when I watched the film. He was just getting destroyed on some of them. Dontari Poe just murdered him 3 times on hits, and I was like, how the hell did he get up? Because I know if I got hit that hard by Dontari Poe, I would be in a coma, just destroyed by Dontari Poe. So I wouldn't say that the pass rush was bad against the Buccaneers just because they only got 1 sack. They hit the quarterback all day, and they forced him into just a bad game. I mean, he only completed 61% of his passes. He's a guy who, on his career, tends to complete closer to 65. He's more of that quick dink and dunk kind of quarterback, too. He just threw the ball all day, and that's why we're sitting here like, oh, they didn't get that many hits, that many hurries. But they were there all day. They were getting pressure at least once every other snap. They were forcing him off the spot. They did a great job.
Yeah, I think, I remember Mark Schlereth, who was announcing the game, was talking about the Falcons' pass rush being lacking. I didn't really agree with that take. Love you, Mark Schlereth, but I think you're wrong on that one. And I think a lot of it, as Scott said, was the Bucs getting the ball out quickly. And I think what changed, Fitzpatrick completed 50% of his passes in the first half, was averaging 3.9 yards per attempt, and I think he had a passer rating of 60 or 62 or something like that in the first half. Then Poole and Trufant took out of the game, and then all of a sudden he starts completing 69% of his passes, has a 90-something passer rating, and is averaging 8 yards per attempt. Like, that's not because the pass rusher wasn't getting there. It's because the coverage was not as good in the second half as it was in the first half, and that's owed to the injuries. The Falcons, as Scott said, were getting pressure, but because the ball was coming out so quick and because our coverage was not as good, the fact of the matter is that, when the Bucs were trying to get the ball out in under 2.5 seconds, um, you know, their guys were getting open and making plays in those 2.5 seconds in the second half, and that they weren't really making in the first half. And that is owed to the coverage. That's owed to the linebackers. That's owed to the safeties. That's owed to the cornerbacks. And again, when you lose a guy like Desmond Trufant, and then you have a wide receiver like Mike Evans, who is a top 5 wide receiver in the league, um, and Trufant's a top 5 corner, you're going to feel that. Like, Robert Alford is good, probably one of the best number 2 cornerbacks in the league, but he can't check Mike Evans. We've seen that the last 2 years. That's like the limit of his powers. His ceiling is somewhere. He can check a top 20 wide receiver, probably even a top 10 wide receiver like he did with DeAndre Hopkins 2 years ago. But a top 5 wide receiver, no, he can't do that. So it's one of those things where I don't feel like the pass rush, contrary to popular opinion, the pass rush was bad. I think it was good throughout the game, but in the second half, when the Bucs were able to go to that quick passing game, it was a lot more effective in the second half due to the coverage and the injuries that we had in the secondary. All right, next question from ATL Sports 404 is, we didn't hear Gerald McCoy's name called very much this past Sunday. Schweitzer did a very solid job, but he's got another tough test this week. What do you expect from him?
I think the test for Schweitzer this week isn't nearly as tough as Gerald McCoy. I think McCoy matches up better against Schweitzer than either Linval Joseph or Tom Johnson or, Shamar Stephen or Jaleel Johnson do. The issue with McCoy is that Atlanta had to use Mack to help him out, which is fine. Schweitzer did a good job. Schweitzer played his duo blocks well. Schweitzer knew exactly what he was supposed to do on those. He was able to attack right up right into him. He was able to hold him off in pass protection. I think McCoy had maybe one hurry that I saw when I watched the game back. It was a good game for the Falcons, and it was a good game for Wes Schweitzer. The hard part of the Minnesota line is more the defensive ends. Daniil Hunter, Everson Griffin, Brian Robeson, those guys are just they're destroyers. And I'm more worried about the tackles than I am the interior guys.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Scott. In terms of Schweitzer's performance against the Bucs, rewatching the film, he did get a lot of help from Alex Mack in pass protection. The Falcons slid their protection to that side. There was a couple of times where Schweitzer did go one-on-one against McCoy. I remember one time where McCoy put him on skates and walked him back into Matt Ryan. And then there was another time where Schweitzer sort of held his own, on the few occasions where they left him on an island. I think Schweitzer did a good job in the run game. I think the Falcons smartly schemed their game plan to sort of run away from McCoy and rarely put Schweitzer in a position where he had to make a one-on-one block against McCoy at the point of attack. Usually when that was the case, he often got help from either Schrader or Mack to sort of make that block. Gerald McCoy is one of the best defensive tackles in the league. In terms of first step quickness, it's probably Aaron Donald, and it's hard to think of somebody that I would put above Gerald McCoy in terms of their ability to win with their first step off that interior as a pure 3 technique in today's game. It's hard to think of somebody else. Maybe Geno Atkins, that's probably about it. So it's
Aaron
one of those
Donald.
things. Yeah, no, I mentioned Aaron Donald, but
Okay.
It's tough to, the Falcons did a good job of sort of scheming to help out Schweitzer with both their double team blocks and also their play calls to prevent Schweitzer from being forced in a position to have to block McCoy one-on-one. But the few opportunities that he did, I think Schweitzer, for the most part, did his job. You wouldn't sit here and say, oh, this is a clinic that he put up against one of the best defensive tackles in the league by any means. McCoy got him on a couple of plays, as McCoy is wont to do. But I think overall it was certainly a check in Wes Schweitzer's column that he wasn't necessarily overwhelmed by Gerald McCoy too often in this game. So definitely a positive for him as well as Ben Garland. Sorry, got something in my throat. ATL Sports 404 asked, fair to say the Tampa Bay game was Sark's best game as a play caller so far?
I think that's safe to say, and I think he's starting to get more of a rhythm of exactly who his targets are, exactly who his receivers are, exactly who his running backs are, exactly how to call the game. He still has trouble setting up certain plays. Like, he still has no idea how to set up those wide receiver screens, and he still calls way too many of them in stupid situations. But I do think that he is a much better play caller than he was earlier in the season. As he continues to get to know these players and this team and how they work and ways to help the offensive line, play at their best, I think Sark will continue to get better as a play caller.
Yeah, I think this game is definitely up there on the pantheon of good Sark games. I probably would put the Packers game and the Seahawks game ahead of it. I do think the Bucs' decision to basically play zone on the outside sort of made it really easy for Sark, and it wasn't necessarily great play calling. It was just like, when you play zone outside and you're going to play zone against Julio Jones, like, I mean, I understand the thought process behind that, where it's like, okay, we'll play zone so we don't get beat deep by Julio Jones. That didn't really work out for them, but it just sort of gives up a lot of sort of underneath stuff and comeback routes and out patterns and sort of things. You got to man up Julio Jones. Like, that's just the reality of the situation. You're going to see a team like Minnesota this week where they'll play cover 3, but with Xavier Rhodes, he's going to play man coverage every single snap. So, Trey Waynes might be playing zone, but Xavier Rhodes is going to be playing man coverage. And so, Minnesota, Mike Zimmer is probably better defensive coordinator than Mike Smith. I don't know if that's a hot take. But so I don't know if this was Sark's best game play calling this year. It certainly was his most productive game from a play calling standpoint, no doubt about it. But I think a lot of that has to do with the Bucs sort of having, not a great game plan and certainly not executing the game plan as it was called. So I would probably put this at number 3 in terms of his best play game called so far this year, behind Green Bay and Seattle, personally. Andy at Falcons, Andy asks, do you think Garland getting reps was anything other than giving Wes a rest?
I think Garland getting reps was Wes was going against his toughest test of the season, and they wanted to, let him have 20 on, 5 off. He's still learning. He's still figuring out how to play right guard in the NFL. And I figure this way they could give him 20 on, and then the 5 that he's off, he can sit there and stand next to the offensive line coach and be like, this is what Garland's doing well, this is what Garland's doing poorly. Some guys learn that way, and that might be the way Wes learns is, all right, so if I do this well, I'm going to be able to handle him better. And then they gave him another 20 on and then 5 off. Because it seems pretty coordinated. I didn't count the exact snaps, but it was like right towards the middle of the second quarter, he was out for about a handful of snaps. And then right towards the end of the third quarter, there was another handful of snaps. And then he played the rest of the game out. So it might have just been giving him a rest, but at the same time, I think it was more like instructional than that. It was more, hey, here's how you play the position. Here's what Bennett is doing well. Here's how he's holding up well. Here's how he's getting his leverage underneath his pads. This is how he's pushing back McCoy. And it doesn't hurt to throw in a fresh guy against Gerald McCoy when McCoy is subbing out 10 or so snaps as well. So you let Garland come in and take all the pressure off of West to play 2 different guys who are beating on him all day.
It's interesting because Dan Quinn after the game said this was sort of a plan that they had all along. I don't know whether that meant it's a week-old plan or it's a month-old plan or something like that. My recollection is Garland got 2 series worth of work. One of those series was a really short series because it was the series where Sanu threw the touchdown to Julio, and I think that series only lasted like 3 plays. So like he didn't get a ton of work, but probably the plan was to give him a couple of series and sort of alternate them in the second and third quarter a little bit. Whether it was due to Wes Schweitzer not playing well, whether it was due to Wes Schweitzer being hurt, whether it was due to some other reason, I don't know. I did notice it against the Seahawks early in that game that Wes Schweitzer got his right leg rolled up on, and I think that explains some of the struggles he had throughout that game. So I imagine it could be possibly that they wanted to give Wes a rest for a little bit, given that his knee might not be 100%. I know he's not on the injury report, but guess what, guys? Teams aren't truthful with their injury reports. Shocking to say, but so it's one of those things where they only put guys on the injury report if it's detrimental to their ability to practice, and presumably Wes Schweitzer's injury wasn't enough to prevent him from practicing this week. So we've seen Jake Matthews basically have one leg and still out there being a full participant in practice. So it's one of those things where I wouldn't read too much into that, but. Yeah, who knows? We'll see if this is something that continues in the upcoming weeks against the Vikings this week, against the Saints the week after, and Tampa Bay again. So it'll be interesting to see if Garland starts getting mixed in more. Can't say I fault the Falcons for wanting to give Garland a look. I think he's certainly a capable player, and I don't think it's necessarily a reflection on Schweitzer, or should be interpreted as that. But I think getting Garland some reps certainly would be beneficial, not only to the team in their immediate future, but also in their long-term future, trying to see exactly what they have in Ben Garland. And in his limited opportunities, I thought he played very well. All right, let's move on and move ahead to this upcoming matchup with the 9-2 Minnesota Vikings. Falcons are playing at home. That certainly gives them an advantage. But between these two teams, the Falcons certainly are dealing with a lot more injuries. Desmond Trufant is dealing with a concussion. Right now, his status presumably would be doubtful as opposed to playing this upcoming weekend. Who knows, given these concussion protocols. The same thing goes with Devontae Freeman, who's now missed 2 straight games with a concussion and might miss a third. Brian Poole is day-to-day and questionable this week with a back injury. Ty Sambrailo is also questionable whether he'll come back from the hamstring injury that forced him out last week. The only real major injury that the Vikings are dealing with is Mike Remmers, who's dealing with a concussion, and that puts him at questionable. But from what I've heard and seen, it's likely that he'll come back this week. But, you never know with the concussion, as he said. But, it's one of those things where those injuries in the secondary, particularly the Trufant and Poole, could make a major impact in this game because the Vikings, surprise, surprise, arguably have the best duo of wide receivers in the league with Thielen and Diggs, at least in terms of certain metrics. When you look at Pro Football Focus yards per route run metric, they're the only team, the Vikings that is, that has 2 wide receivers in the top 10 in that metric. Last year the Falcons had 2 in Julio and Taylor Gabriel, and you certainly could have said that they were the best duo in the league last season. So, not to say that Thielen and Diggs are quite on the same level as Julio and Gabriel are, but they're not that far from that, which is something that I don't think anybody would have said going into the season. So those injuries in the Falcons secondary certainly could have an impact, because I think you would feel a lot more comfortable trying to cover Thielen and Diggs if you had Trufant and or Poole out there this upcoming Sunday. Now let's talk about some of the. Oh, go ahead, Scott. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I think Devontae Freeman might actually be back this week. He was starting to practice towards the end of last week, and I think he might have been able to clear the protocol had there been another day or so. But the fact that, it was a Sunday game as opposed to a Monday game or even a Thursday game, that's what caused him to be out. I wouldn't be shocked to see him make it back in time for this next game. And that would be a very nice thing to have. Poole, I think, will be back. I'm with you on Trufant probably being out this week. And then Sambrailo, I don't really think he's that important to even really mention, but it is what it is there. It's a tough matchup these receivers that they have are in Diggs and Thielen are some of the better receivers in the NFL, and I would have never guessed that. So if Trufant and Poole are out, you've got to get a great game from either C.J. Goodwin or Bleedy Ray Wilson that they just haven't played all year. And it's not saying that they don't have the ability. I'm saying they literally have not played football all year outside of maybe last week when Goodwin got a whole butt ton of snaps when Poole went out. So I don't think it's going to be a huge deal to see that. I think they're going to get their yards, though. I really do. And I think the only way the Falcons can stop that is with their pass rush. Remmers and Reif, they're solid. They haven't given up a sack this season, but I think a large part of that is because Case Keenum gets the ball out quickly. And their interior line doesn't tend to face a lot of great interior players. So I'd love to see Jarrett get in there. I'd love to see Claiborne move inside for a couple of snaps and see what he can do against their left guard. And I think it's Pat Elflein is playing center for them. And while Elflein should be solid, he's still a rookie. And when you've got a rookie and you've got a guy like Dontari Poe and you're going against Nick Easton and Pat Elflein, you should be able to create some pressure. Joe Berger's solid, but I still think that he's not good enough to handle Grady Jarrett one-on-one. It comes down to whether Vic Beasley can, put up a 3-sack game on Mike Remmers or whether he's going to look like the Vic Beasley of 2017 again.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Scott. It's going to be interesting to see sort of how this game goes because I do think, given some of the issues in the secondary, even if Poole plays, I think a guy like Thielen is a bad matchup for him. Thielen plays about half of his reps in the slot, and if Poole plays, he's going to be primarily used in the slot. So I do think even if he plays, that certainly will be, I'd rather have Brian Poole out there than Bleedy Ray Wilson playing the slot. But, I do think that's going to be a tough matchup. And I agree with you. The Falcons pass rush has to sort of step up and carry the day. The Vikings have been really good at avoiding sacks. Case Keenum has been really good in terms of his pocket mobility and his pocket awareness to avoid those sacks. He's been able to use his legs to extend plays. If I'm not mistaken, I think he's been sacked the least out of any quarterback in the NFL this year. Yeah, that is the case. And so, that's not necessarily fully on, the offensive line, but the offensive line is certainly doing a good enough job. I thought they did a really good job against the Rams front, given the presences of guys like Aaron Donald and Robert Quinn, who I would say those two guys are probably better than any pass rusher the Falcons have. Not by a huge margin, but certainly I would say if I was trading guys, I'd probably trade for those two guys. And they were not completely shut down by any means, but certainly weren't able to sort of overwhelm that Vikings offensive line to the same level that we've seen other mildly competent pass rushers do to that past Vikings offensive line. So I think that is a testament to their offensive line's play improving. So I do think the front from the Falcons, particularly the interior with Jarrett and Poe, really need to step up this week. And one of the things that to stop a guy like Keenum, who isn't necessarily a power thrower, doesn't have a lot of height, I think you need to get interior pressure with him and really sort of create that push up the middle to collapse the pocket and really sort of limit his options to step up in the pocket and to use his legs to make some plays and sort of close down those throwing windows, which with a shorter quarterback like Case Keenum tend to be a little bit smaller. And I think if the interior can do that, then I do think it can offset some of those issues in the secondary and then really sort of, make a difference with this defense being able to put the Vikings offense into some bad situations. We'll see how that goes. But obviously, I think the marquee matchup is going to be the Falcons offense against the Vikings defense. The Vikings defense, pretty much any defensive category you look up, you're going to find either a top 5 or a top 10 ranking. They're second in red zone, first on third downs, 10th in defensive passer rating, second in rushing yards allowed, fifth in total yards allowed, fifth in points allowed. So this Viking defense is legit. Fortunately, the Falcons' offense is looking like it's back to its expected levels of being one of the most potent offenses in the league. So this is going to be sort of the marquee matchup. And we've seen in the past where the Vikings have been very effective at slowing down the Falcons' offense, in part because of Xavier Rhodes' ability to sort of keep Julio contained in two previous games. He's held Julio to 11 combined catches and 138 yards, which is not nothing, but certainly compared to what Julio Jones is capable of doing, particularly coming off a 250-yard performance, and to go down to an average of 69 yards is a pretty far drop off. So and also you have the Vikings being able to get pressure before. Scott mentioned the two defensive ends. Everson Griffin is leading the league, is tied for the league with 12 sacks. He has the sort of combination of first step quickness and power, and he's also developed a spin move now that typically is not a formula for success for a guy like Jake Matthews, who is coming off of a pretty solid game, but certainly nobody on the Bucs defensive line at defensive end is on the same level as Griffin. And it's going to be a tough matchup. You got a guy like Anthony Barr, who always seems to find ways to make plays. Barr is basically the player that we all want Vic Beasley and Devondre Campbell to develop into as a strong side linebacker, with that versatility and that length and that ability. We'll see what the Falcons have. It's going to be a tall task for Sark, but there are ways that you can beat the Vikings. Defense, it starts with the offensive line doing a good job in protection, and it starts with being able to run the football effectively, and it starts with scheming certain things, and really relying on guys other than the guy that Xavier Rhodes is covering to sort of pick up the slack. Because I don't expect Rhodes to shut down Julio Jones, but I certainly don't expect Julio Jones to put up 150 plus yards against him. So it's one of those things where I think there's a favorable matchup against Trey Waynes. I think that's a bad matchup with Waynes against Taylor Gabriel. But we know one of the issues this season has been the Falcons' inability to sort of maximize Gabriel. They've done a better job in recent weeks, but it still isn't quite to the level where you feel confident that they'll be able to sort of put a guy like Gabriel, a year ago, if Gabriel was going up against Trey Waynes, Gabriel probably would put up 200 yards against him. This year, he might get 3 targets. That seems to be the difference. And so I think that's something that Sark and it's going to need to take advantage of. I think Tevin Coleman will have some opportunities in the passing game, but that has been another question mark with Sark's utilization of him these last couple of weeks. So, still some questions with the Falcons offense, and we'll see against this very good Vikings defense whether they'll be able to find ways to exploit it. I said a mouthful there. We got some questions about this matchup. ATL Sports 404 asks, what needs to be done to slow down Minnesota's offense? Their defense is obviously going to be tough to score on, so this could be a week our defense assists our offense from having to put up 30 plus.
The best thing to slow down that offense is for the defensive line to really do their thing. Like, they've got to stop the run. They've got to rush the passer. They've got to just play all around great football. And it all starts up front, and it all starts with that defensive line. And honestly, I'm going to put this game on Grady Jarrett because he should be able to dominate this game. I don't see anybody on that Minnesota offensive line who can handle him one-on-one. And if he gets a one-on-one matchup, he has to destroy it.
Yeah. I think, the Vikings offense, you look at it on paper and you're like, yeah, they don't have anything that scares me. But it is one of those things where all their pieces sort of add up to be a very effective unit. They're not necessarily a team that's built to put up a ton of points week in and week out. But they have been pretty consistent. They actually might have more 30-point games this year than the Falcons do, if I'm not mistaken. So it's one of those things where they can put points on you if you're not careful because they have a balanced offense. They can run the football effectively. Jerick McKinnon, I think, is going to be an interesting matchup for this Falcons defense. We've had some issues in the past with capable receiving running backs. The last time McKinnon played the Falcons, he tore us a new one, and who saw that coming? But it's one of those things where like he'll be a guy that they'll have to stop. They'll have to put the clamps down on Latavius Murray in the Vikings running game. They'll have to put pressure on Case Keenum, as we talked about. They'll have to find ways to cover these wide receivers. Diggs is a speedster, while Thielen is more their sort of possession guy. But both those guys are capable of making big plays, and a lot of it has been, when you give Keenum time to throw, and when he's able to extend plays out of his, a guy like Thielen is really good at sort of doing that scramble drill stuff and getting open and breaking open and getting plays down the field. So it's kind of similar a little bit to what Russell Wilson is known for, and so that's one of the elements that you got to stop. Kyle Rudolph is having a really strong season, and has been a reliable outlet for them. Rudolph is basically the player that I think a lot of us want Austin Hooper to be long term, and so they got a lot of options there. And given the Falcons are missing, potentially going to be missing their number one cornerback and their number three cornerback, it's really going to be reliant on other guys stepping up and filling those voids. It's going to be a challenge for the Falcons, but I think they certainly have the pieces to answer that challenge, and particularly if their defensive line can sort of control the game a little bit, then I think they certainly are in a favorable position to slow down the Vikings offense. Your homie Brian asks, how well do you think our defensive line matches up with the Vikings offensive line? I think we can win the line of scrimmage. We could dominate the Vikings, who are due for a loss in a bad game.
I tend to agree. I think the Vikings have had a very good season so far. It's a tough matchup for them in terms of how their offensive line matches up with the Falcons' defensive line. If Vic Beasley can be the Vic Beasley of old, he should be able to destroy Mike Remmers and get 3 sacks. I don't see Riley Reif as being that great on the other side, so Adrian Claiborne's going to have to do his job on that side. I think it all comes down to, as Aaron was saying, right in the middle. As long as the Falcons can create that pressure right at the middle, even if they've got to blitz it in there, I think this team could end up winning this game.
Yeah, I'm with you, Scott. Like, you look at Remmers, you look at Reif, they're not stars, but I think because what they can do is sort of, ride guys to the outside, and then with Keenum having room to step up and sort of extend plays, that's really been where they've done a good job sort of avoiding sacks and not really, giving up those negative plays in pass protection. And I think you have to be able to create that pressure up the middle. I think that's where the Vikings offensive line is weakest, in the middle, even though I think they've played well this year. I think Joe Berger is a good, underrated, longtime veteran player, sort of like an Andy Levitre type. I think Elflein has played well as a rookie. I think Nick Easton is certainly a competent sort of starter and has been a competent replacement for Alex Boone at that left guard position. But I think Easton is the guy that you want to attack. I think you want to get matchups with Poe and Jared against that guy. With Poe able to use the power that he has to sort of collapse the pocket, I think with Jarrett, with his quickness and his disruptive capability, I think that's really where you want. And of course, you want the guys on the outside with Claiborne and Tack and Beasley and Brooks Reed and Shelby, those guys to win their matchups. They're capable of doing so, but I don't necessarily expect, a 6 sacks sort of game from our edge guys, like we saw a couple of weeks ago, or, even if Beasley, if Remmers misses the game, I certainly think, I don't know who their backup right tackle is. It's something like some Hill guy or something like that. I don't know who it is. But, that's an opportunity for Beasley and Tack, who will play on that left side against that right tackle, to maybe feast on a lesser player. So that certainly is a positive for the Falcons. But I do think it starts with the interior, and those guys have to create pressure and collapse that pocket. Brian asks, where do you think the Vikings defense is most vulnerable? I definitely think Brady, Rodgers, and Breeze, if given another opportunity, would find a way to pick that defense apart.
I think that defense is most vulnerable right over the middle. While I do like Andrew Sendejo, I do think Harrison Smith is one of the better free safeties in the league. I do think Kendricks and Barr are solid. I think there is a weakness there when it comes to covering tight ends and covering running backs that can be exploited. And I think Atlanta needs to use that and basically treat them like they were the 2016 Broncos, where they had Tevin Coleman slide out to the slot and just use the speed that they have with Coleman and Hooper and attack that intermediate area. Again, I'm not saying that they're bad. They have one of the faster groups there, but I think Atlanta can find the holes in their scheme to make everything work. I don't think there's a guy that can handle Coleman one-on-one. This might be a game where Gabriel goes off because I don't think they've got the slot corner to really handle Gabriel and old man Terrence Newman.
Yeah, I think Gabriel is going to be more matched up on the outside with Trey Waynes, and Sanu's going to go up against Newman and Mac Alexander, who's been splitting reps inside. Waynes likes to play off coverage, and I think that's really something where if you have the right route combinations with Gabriel underneath and using that speed, where Waynes will have to play off and then have to make open field tackles, I think that's where the Vikings can be exploited. So again, I do think, we've said this before. We said this against the Seahawks when they were dealing with their cornerback injuries. There was a prime matchup for Gabriel to have a big game. Gabriel did, make some plays in that game. I think this is another game where the Falcons need to find ways to scheme Taylor Gabriel to have a big day. If they do, I think they can really feast upon that matchup opposite Julio Jones. I think, there automatically is the knee-jerk reaction is Julio had a 250-yard game. Let's get him 15 targets again this week. Obviously I'm not going to sit here and tell you to not throw the ball to Julio Jones, but I think if you can find a way to scheme 6 to 8 targets for Taylor Gabriel this week, I think that would be a huge boon for the Falcons. I think Tevin Coleman going up against Eric Kendricks is a favorable matchup. I do think Anthony Barr has the athleticism to not necessarily shut down Tevin Coleman, because I don't think he has quite Coleman's speed, but I certainly think he has his athleticism that sort of he can hang with him. I don't think Kendricks has that. And so I think if you can get, Coleman on some like dagger routes and whatnot and some angle routes out of the backfield, I think you can really exploit that, as well as splitting them out wide. I don't really necessarily expect them to be effective running the football against this Vikings front. I think the Vikings defensive line is very good at doing their job. I don't, yeah. So I don't really see the running game getting going a lot. But obviously, I don't think you should just completely abandon it, because if you get into a situation where now you're worried about the Vikings pass rush, you don't want those guys to be able to pin their ears back, and you running the football would be effective there. So I think the Falcons have to be smart with their scheming. I don't think they can just sort of copy last week's game plan and be like, oh yeah, let's just throw the ball to Julio Jones. The Vikings aren't going to be playing zone coverage against Julio on the outside. Rhodes is going to be pressing him. He's going to have safety help. He's going to be manning him up. And that's the most effective way that you can sort of guard Julio Jones. And Rhodes has had success doing it that way, and the Vikings have had success keeping Julio contained in that way. So I think, the Falcons will have to find other ways to sort of exploit the Vikings for some big plays this week other than relying on Julio Jones to be Julio Jones. Falcons Fury at South Life Gold asks, what should I be more afraid of, Adam and Diggs or Rhodes and Griffin?
I would be more worried about Adams and Thielen. Or not Adams, Thielen and Diggs. Just because they're better and Atlanta's not healthy on that side of the ball right now. And if Trufant somehow clears protocol, I would be a lot less worried about Thielen and Diggs. A lot less worried.
Yeah. I think you're right, Scott. I think that's the right answer. But, of those four guys, the guy that scares me the most is Griffin. Um, he's just a bad matchup against Jake Matthews. Like he is the guy that Jake Matthews. When you look at the guys that have given Jake Matthews the most trouble, they are basically Everson Griffin types of rushers, and so he's the guy I'd be most worried about. I think Rhodes will do his job as he's done. I don't necessarily know if I should be afraid of him, but he's going to do his job, and the Vikings are going to certainly not make the same mistake that the Bucs made, and they won't let Julio beat them. They're too good and too disciplined and too well coached a defense to have that happen. So I think, if we're talking about who had the monster game, come next Monday and next Tuesday when we're doing the show again, I think right now I'd probably say that Rhodes and Griffin are probably the more dangerous of the two. But obviously, there's reasons to believe that Thielen and Diggs could also do a lot of damage. And so how the Falcons deal with those four matchups, I think will determine quite a bit about how the rest of this game goes.
So our producer is having a bit of an emergency right now. I do have to. We do need to wrap up pretty quickly, but we will go ahead and get the call-outs of the weekend before we do. Aaron, what would you say is grinding your gears?
This week, there's not a whole lot. The Falcons played a great game, so there's not really a whole lot that's bothering me this week.
For me, I just don't want to see Jeff Triplett again the rest of the season because the Falcons have had him twice. They didn't have him at all last year, so I get that they're getting their stuff back again. But please, God, no more Jeff Triplett the rest of the season. Atlanta needs a game where they're not getting screwed over by a referee who's incompetent. So, yeah, give me someone other than Jeff Triplett for a ref, and I'll be perfectly happy.
Okay, guys. Well, fortunately, we're going to have to call this episode a little short. If you guys know what to do, follow us on Twitter. I'm at Falcons. Scott is at Karasik S. Use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag to send in your questions. We apologize to everybody who sent in their questions this week and that we did not get to. But we'll be back next week to talk more Falcons football, and hopefully they have extended the record to 8-4. So we will see you guys next week.
What? No, I mean, we had probably like 12